panel. Sabrina Siddiqui is a politics reporter for the Huffington Post. Earl Afari Hutchinson is a political analyst and syndicated columnist. And Igor Bobek is the assistant editor at Talking Points Memo. Gang, it's great to have you all here. And I want to start first with what we understand to be taking place right now. And as we've seen this week, the Newtown families have returned to Washington, D.C. And as we understand it, there's an 11:30 meeting that's happening with Senator Manchin. And some of these families will all remember the Manchin-Toomey bill that failed back in April on background checks. But as we look at, Sabrina, your article today talking about NSA, senators who back NSA spying oppose gun background checks for infringing rights, it really sets up this hard contrast about those who are willing, our elected officials, who are willing to give up our privacy rights, but are not willing to talk about much-needed gun reform in the country.
Right. Well, what lawmakers are essentially saying is it's okay to collect data from Americans in terms of their call records and possibly even electronic communications to keep the country safe from the threat of terrorism, even if those Americans aren't actually suspected of any wrongdoing. And then, you know, just a couple of months ago, one of the major arguments against the background checks amendment was that it was infringing upon the privacy rights of gun owners and could possibly lead to federal gun registry, even though the measure explicitly banned the establishment of any kind of federal gun registry. So we're saying that it's not, we are willing to keep Americans safe and do anything that it takes to do that, but there are a lot more deaths by gun-related deaths every year than there are Americans whose lives are lost from terrorism. So gun-related violence is also a very real threat. We're talking about more than 30,000 lives that are lost each year. So why don't we bucket that under the notion of keeping Americans safe?
When we put it in that context, if we look at gun deaths since Newtown, there have been 4,924 or more. This is from Slate.com putting out that figure. But Igor, when we look at the work of the Vice President, who was really leading on this issue because of the task force that he was put in charge of, and now we understand that Biden is going to restart the White House push on guns. An invite went out yesterday to a White House event coming up on the 18th. Is there really the appetite in D.C. to start this back up again?
I think it's on the back burner right now. It's waiting for immigration. Biden wants to keep this drum roll going, to keep the momentum going, and that's why you're seeing these Newtown families on the Hill again lobbying for this legislation. But ultimately, the decision rests with Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and whether he can recall this bill, if he can find enough support, enough votes. Senator Manchin has said before that he expects there to be more votes for this bill, but I think ultimately it'll have to wait for immigration, for debt ceiling later this year.
All right, you bring up a great point about immigration, because we certainly are anticipating maybe some movement on this as both sides seem to be warming up. But really there is a mark, and we've been saying that the senators want to have their access to it to be able to put their mark on immigration reform. And basically the biggest flaws that some people have been talking about are border security, benefits and taxes, who can apply for status, refugee status, and asylum. Earl, talk about the fact, the biggest issue for some on the right is border security. But as we look at certain Democrats, they're talking about the big issue of the fact that we're not going to have thought out benefits for marriage equality. And if the Supreme Court comes down on that coming up on one of the next couple of Mondays here in June, then it is a reality, and it doesn't seem like that's going to be the comprehensive immigration reform that we really need.
Well, you know, the issue has been muddied all along, deliberately so by, unfortunately, many in the GOP. But even before the immigration reform bill came up, border security all along has been really the sticking point by many GOP senators and legislators. They over and over again said, look, we're not going to have comprehensive immigration reform. We're not going to have any deal whatsoever in terms of who's admitted, how they're admitted, and all the other issues that are certainly in tandem with that until we are assured that border security is there. Now, we understand that a number of amendments will be put forth during the debate over immigration reform about border security. And, you know, one of the amendments that could be very, very interesting, and we'll see how far it goes, is, as we well know, Homeland Security now is responsible for border enforcement. However, now, some senators that are making the big deal about border security are saying, no, Congress now should step in and have the responsibility of, presumably, enforcement measures, too, about border security. That's going to be a very interesting, really, debate on that. Congress versus Homeland Security and all the issues involving border security.
And while we talk about border security, some are saying that while that is a sticking point, it might be a red herring to what really is the larger sticking point, and that's President Obama. Here is Senator Menendez talking with my colleague yesterday. Take a listen.
Well, I think he has Obamophobia. I think Ted Cruz is fixated on this issue, and it's amazing to me, representing a state like Texas, that he doesn't understand that a pathway to citizenship is really what is desired.
So, Sabrina, is that really the bigger issue here, that there's some sort of Obamophobia? And then if we look at the larger picture, the fact that this is really hurting any chances of crafting a position for Marco Rubio to have some type of substantial legislation to run on come 2016.
Right. Well, there actually have been record deportations under the Obama administration. So Republicans continue to hone in on this idea that the border isn't secure enough, and they act like President Obama actually hasn't done enough with respect to deportations, even though that's actually not the case. So with Marco Rubio, there is an element of him being in a sensitive position, and he has at times tried to distance himself from the White House during this process because he is, after all, the salesman to conservatives who continue to oppose a pathway to citizenship. And that's why I think you see him, especially in recent weeks, trying to quell some of the conservative concerns by beefing up the bill in terms of border security and also introducing an English proficiency amendment yesterday. And that's sort of how he's trying to balance his role as part of the comprehensive effort in both trying to get it through the Senate but also appealing to his conservative base.
All right, the last thing that I want to touch on, Earl, is something that has sparked a lot of conversations, and that's your article on Clarence Thomas, saying affirmative action's biggest beneficiary is and biggest hypocrite in regard to him. You note that there have been, Thomas right now is considering the vote to uphold Fisher's case, which is the case about Abigail Noel Fisher against the University of Texas at Austin, in which she claims that race was the primary reason that she was rejected for admission. But you come down really hard on Clarence Thomas and saying that he's not paying attention to his own history of where he came from to get where he is.
You know, one of the things that many people can't figure out about Clarence Thomas, here's a fellow that essentially has had all of the benefits going back to Yale Law School, Assistant Secretary of Education, a position on the federal judiciary and, of course, Supreme Court. Every step of the way, he's had, let's just say, patrons. Every step of the way, he's had the benefit of affirmative action. What many can't figure out, why the vehemence? Now, you know, it's one thing to be opposed to affirmative action. I mean, obviously, many people, you know, have raised issues about that. I mean, it's been a hot-button issue for a long time. But the passion, the vehemence, almost just a pathological need to really hit at affirmative action, that's been the thing that has puzzled so many people, and quite frankly, it's puzzled me. And we're going to see it manifested now. He's already tipped his hand how he's going to vote on the Supreme Court in the Fisher case. But, you know, it's still going to be an ongoing issue. Many people are going to continue to ask, Mr. Thomas, you have benefited so much from a program over time. Why do you want to deny so many other people the same benefits of that? And quite frankly, I think it's a fair question.
It was a fascinating read. I want to say thanks to the panel today, Sabrina Siddiqui of the Huffington Post, syndicated columnist Earl Hutchinson, Igor Bobak of Talking Points Memo. Great to have all